Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Just, of course, first of all, just to say hello and let you know I'm very delighted to be here and being with you this evening. There's an awful lot of young talent out there, I've been told, and I'm sure that's true. And also a lot of my favorite kind of people, which are music educators and band directors. And so what I'm going to do for the next hour is try and tell you the various things that I attempt with this instrument, which of course is a toy. And that's the mental attitude I believe in, that everybody should never be serious about this. You understand? It's just a lot of fun to do. It's a lot of fun to play, right? You don't work a trumpet, you play a trumpet. And I felt that way when I was 9 years of age, and I'm 65 now, and it's still a toy. Okay? All right, so the thing is, never compete with anybody, even if you're in competitions right now. You only play for yourself for fun, to bring pleasure to other people as well as yourself. Okay, that's enough of the sermon. Now we'll get down to music. Okay, I'd like to, first of all, talk about some of the things that I have noticed with school bands, and it has to do with basics of the instrument. So I'll very quickly run through a couple of things that I noticed that are predominant bad habits. One of them is caused by this monster here, the music stand. And first of all, of course, we're going to talk about the stance. And there's a tendency for most players to feel they know that one, you know, but they don't do it, because I'd say about when you see 5 talented trumpet players, trombone players, we usually see them standing improperly. But yet if they're at home just fooling around with their instrument, they're standing perfect. So although one of the most important parts of our music education is, of course, to learn to read music, and then from there to become hopefully a sight reader if you continue, and all that sort of thing. But also the music stand can be the creator of some bad habits. So I'm going to start off first of all with the stance rather quickly. And first of all, just as I stand here now, just something odd, my toes happen to point out. So, but whatever way you stand normally, do not be taken in by the photographs of your favorite trumpet players on album covers and the way that they stand when they're being photographed, because all of us artists are somewhat victimized by the artistry of the photographer. You know, we go back to Louis Armstrong in the old days, and you know, and all of his pictures, because Louis would do whatever he was told, except for when it came time to play the trumpet. Okay, so therefore the old posters, you know, and it's just a thing that you have to look at and say, okay, that was the art of the photographer. That's not the way that person stands and plays the instrument. Okay, first thing is you have to recognize whether you're going to be a power type predominantly player like perhaps I am, or regardless of that, you must stand properly. The stance is very important, and you must give in to the fact that although you're a musician and therefore an artist, you have to be part athlete whether you want to be or not, because you have to be coordinated just like an athlete. And I'm going to do the stance right now, and I talk about certain parts of the techniques that I use. I think it's very important I stay with telling you what I do, rather than trying to describe how Maurice Andre or Doc Severinsen or any one of the great young trumpet players of today plays. I think it's better if I'll leave that to them to tell you how they do it, because no two of us are the same. That's why it's such a wonderful art form. And some of the things that I tell you, if it works, and if it doesn't, don't worry, because there are so many wonderful trumpet players that I'm a big fan of that don't use the system I use at all. So there's more than one path. But that does not apply to the basics. We all have to salute the basics. Okay. In the stance. It's quite simple, of course, to just stand here and remember one thing, that when you give a child a horn and you say, hey, see if you can get us out of this. The child usually will put their lips over the mouthpiece, right, and there's no sound comes out of the horn. But check out their body when you say, no, blow, when they're disappointed with the first try. Then you say, no, blow it real hard. Don't give them any teaching yet, and then they go, that's it, right? And that's the way you should be, because you're leaning back, blowing real hard. You won't find that on any page in the Arban book. Okay. The point that, so we start at perfect. So the reason I'm picking on the music stand is because I see this so often, that there's something, some sort of natural human error with all of us almost, that when we get a newish piece of music, whether we wear contact lenses like myself, or glasses, or have perfect eyesight, there's some rather odd habit that we seem all to have, that we think if we get our eyeballs closer to this music that we're reading, that we're going to read and play it better, And I know I get caught in it myself, I mean, I have my eyes checked and I can read music from here, and if I'm not careful, instead of myself being equally balanced on both feet, there it goes. And it isn't helping me at all. I'm either going to read it or I'm not going to read it, but I'm developing a bad habit. And then if you spend a lot of time, so the message there is to always adjust the music stand to you. Don't you adjust to the music stand, right? And it isn't a bad idea when you're warming up to stand in front of a mirror, by the way, and just check out how you're playing, because in final essence, none of us teachers are the real teacher. The real teacher is you yourself, of course, your eyes and your ears, Okay, so enough about the music stand, but it's just that I see it so often that I like to kind of start pointing that one out. So don't develop a bad habit in your stance, even though you might have started out properly. As you get more advanced, you'll get more and more new music coming at you quickly by your band director, and then he's yelling at you to hold up your instruments, hold up your horn, right? Boy, we get tired of hearing that one, don't we? Sorry, band director. Okay. In the my demonstrations today will not include the super upper register, because one of the predominant things, I'll do that tonight, but one of the predominant things that no one can escape is a good sensible warm-up, and there is variations on that too. I'll get to that later. But for me, the way I approach the trumpet from a physical standpoint, which is very important, right? The more you can, whatever system you choose to follow, try and pick the one with the fewest rules, because you want to turn this busy mind of yours off and just play. No matter what happens, when I'm feeling healthy and well and having fun, when I walk out here, I love it having my music memorized, of course. And but even if you don't, the whole game is to not think about how you're playing the instrument, You want to think about, am I standing well balanced? Am I this, am I that? The position of my tongue, what syllable am I going to use on that note? Wow, give me a break. I just want to play the trumpet and have some fun. And hopefully play well. Okay. All right. In the bottom register, I use a double pivot always, right? And the two pivots are what I do with my body, and what I do that's very important to me with my jaw. Now, for those, I have an overbite. It's quite imperfect, and so therefore, because I have such an overbite on the top, right? In the lower register, I push my jaw out. Now, for those of you that have perfect teeth as far as the way they meet, therefore your jaw, right? It's not necessary then. Don't just wait, because you're going to pull your jaw back in as you go towards the upper register. And this is what has always worked for me since I was a child. And I've always had one fortunate thing to be able to play in the upper register and still have a big fat sound in the bottom register. And incidentally, before we go any further in this, some of my hits on this instrument, you know, the ones I really love, you know, many of them have never played a double high C in their lives, right? So don't measure your musicality and your thing on how high you can play the instrument. That's a number one bad habit. Also, in my entire life, I never tried to see how high I could play. Even when I was fooling around, I just played up there. I imitated people, and I imitated lots of people, not just one person. You don't want to get hung up on Freddie Hubbard, a Dizzy Gillespie, Miles Davis, Wynton Marsalis, Maynard, anybody. Or you want to get hung up on all of them, you know? And if you end up with a favorite, that's okay, but make sure you check out all the others. Because when you become influenced by everybody, the big reward is you start playing just like yourself, you know? In the upper register, I mentioned the jaw, and going in and out, right? Pushed out to the lower register, in. Now, if I do that, I'm just standing here. There is no energy demand at that level, and of course I'm playing into the microphone, so it's a little louder than it really is. So there's no energy demand, so therefore my knees are locked. You know what I mean? I'm just standing here, right? And therefore, and my jaw is kind of out there when I go into the lower register. All right. Now here's the real lesson in this. After that, and as we play louder and higher, these are the enemies, your own hands. Your own hands are directly connected to your ego. And your ego says, I ain't going to miss and have all those saxophone players turn around and glare at me. There's something about a lead alto player, man. You know, he ought to be forced to learn to play high note trumpet. Okay. What we learn to live with, you know. So therefore, although there's a lesson in that too, every time you miss, you got to know how to laugh, you know, because it sounds absurd, you know, and you're all out there, you know. Remember the fourth tenor and the third alto, they hit a clam, you might not even notice it, but if you're going to play lead trumpet and you miss, everybody notices, you know. So that's part of the dues you've got to pay, and that's okay as long as you have control of your ego once again, and make 1,000 mistakes, and you might not want to laugh out loud. I don't know that your band director will particularly groove on that one. But as I go into the upper register, I want to do something else other than pressing harder on this little bit of tissue here. You know, you say, oh, Maynard, boy, what chops? And I know they mean my lips. And my lips are no stronger than anybody else's. But the control of my airstream, the coordination of my energies, without going too Eastern, I'll get into that later if you'd like, about prana and pranayama and the whole yogic approach to air power, right? Okay, so with that, you are mostly interested in learning to control the airstream to make it work for you. Control the airstream so that it works for you. Okay, so as I've just stood here and played some real easy things to play, and I'm not warmed up, so I'm not going to go upstairs too high, but I do want to show you the first thing that happens when I feel an energy demand is the knees. All right? And first time I told Miles Davis that, he laughed and walked away. He was positive I was kidding him. And 3 nights later, he came back and said, what was that about my knees? And then Miles Davis gave me a lesson. I always treasure those 2 lessons, you know. And because he was one of course, the creative geniuses on the instrument, he also never played in the upper register very much. Yeah. And, all right, in the, as I go upstairs, I may exaggerate some of these body movements just because, so they're visible, you know. Okay, I did it with one hand and I wasn't paying attention, but I was balanced. Okay, now, well, pretend this is the beginning of the challenge. Now the jaw comes back in because I'm about to go upstairs and play a little harder, and I want my stamina there, and I'm not going to get it if the lip becomes swollen, because then I press too hard and I become a 5-minute hero. Right? When you press too hard, you sound great. Boy, have a nice zing to your sound, and you feel you have a power over the instrument. You're already thinking wrong. Okay. All right. So the knees come first, and as I go to the upper register, the jaw comes back. That way, I'm always pointing at this microphone. Interesting. When I was checking myself out when I was younger, all theaters used to have exit signs right in the middle, right back there where the white is. And I used to play to the exit. You're predicting it, and also you're holding your horn in that same position regardless of which register or whether you're playing pianissimo or double forte. Right? All right, so. Thank you, but that is not the way to warm up. Okay. And, but actually, what happened there was I brought more and more of my body energy into use, and therefore I didn't, and when you see my face getting red and blowing up and my neck goes up to his side, what is it now, 22, 23, something like that, you know, and all that, that's the power from within going out that way, right, as opposed to the 5-minute hero play, because in the Hatha Yoga books, which I recommend all wind instrument players and even some that don't play wind instrument players, buy a book on Hatha H-A-T-H-Y-A, and whatever else doesn't turn you on in the book, or if it does, it's great, but turn to the breathing exercises, right? Because they're far closer to what we have than most phys ed advice that you get. I'm talking in terms of how we apply that type of air control to a wind instrument. And also that the two most important types of people for us to observe, physically and every other way, are opera singers. You take a look at Pavarotti, for instance, because he's on TV so much, and he's such a great artist, of course. And watch the way he uses his body when he has these pianissimo little things, and he's walking around during the opera or whatever. And but when it comes to his big performance number, those he's no longer doing this or that or this. He's right like that. He's ready to play a double high C if he ever wanted to. I think he can sing louder than I can play anyway. But the point being that you need that kind of awareness of the use of your body. Now, a lot of people will say, that isn't the way I want to approach the instrument. I want to play, I'll be the principal trumpet with the Boston Symphony, right? Okay, those same type of things apply, regardless of whether you're a jazz player or whether you're are there any country western trumpet players? I'm not sure. But whatever type of music that you're into, the physical approach, when it is correct on the instrument, which frees you to play the instrument the way that you want. Okay. There's a couple of other things that I can get into right now about breathing exercises. When you buy if you buy, just get a paper bag on the Hatha Yoga and turn to where it says, if they use the Indian word, it's prana or pranayama, but they have to say breathing exercises in it, So, and just check out the exercises that are easy for you. Anything that's weird, remember, it's coming from a different part of the world, and some of them are too far up for me. I don't even touch them. But the ones that are easy and natural are getting you into a habit of the way you breathe. I know that one thing that the guys in the band, when they're with me on these full band clinics, enjoy the, if I ask most people to inhale through their nose for me, almost all of them will get this sound. And I've almost not taken in any air at all. And one of the things that you learn about breathing is it's all very well for somebody to say, oh, keep your throat open. Oh, keep your throat open. Of course, the next word is how, Okay. Instead of, and so in the Hatha Yoga books, you'll hear a thing called sound breathing. A lot of you call it sound breathing or throat breathing, depending on which book and which writer, of course. And that'll be a short chapter, and instead of it getting this sound, where I've actually sniffed, and that's the way 99% of all people inhale through their nose. You start, for some reason we do that. And instead of that, if you practice in front of a mirror, you don't have to practice more than twice and you got it, And that is to not move anything here. And when you first try it, sometimes it's helpful to just push your stomach out as you inhale. But don't let anything move here. And instead of getting this sniffing sound, you'll get a far more interesting sound, which is more obvious, and that is, can you tell? Now that's a tremendous amount of air being taken in, and very often when we have a long phrase to play, we do the other, and then of course we're running out of air unnecessarily, you know, and so there are many jokes about the sound of that kind of breathing, you know, having to do with films, but we won't go into that. Okay. One of the things that I enjoy the most when I do these is, I could get into some other things right now if you'd like, but one of the predominant questions before we get into my favorite part, which is question answer. So while I'm going through this one, you can think up a question you'd like to ask, and I hope I'll be able to answer it for you. One of the things that we get is, I get it all the time, of course, well, what can I do to increase my range? You know, that's the most predominant question they're going to ask me. And I have an advice on that because when I was a teenager, one of the things I used to like to do, and I just did it for fun because I was trying to learn the instrument better, but I didn't realize that I was increasing my range by doing it, that to take your favorite song, you know, the one that when you get your horn out of the case and you're playing, and you're just fooling around, and you have some favorite tune, I don't care what it is, but especially if it's a ballad, all right, something with kind of long notes in it. And let me give you an example of it, because you don't own any note in the upper register unless you can play it romantically, right? The worst word is screech trumpet. God, I hate that. and yet, to tell you the truth, there's a place for it, just like every sound that comes out of any instrument has a sound in music. It's just where it's played and where it's placed, you know. Okay. But I'm going to a brief demonstration on how to increase the center of your range. Try to think that way. Whatever's your middle note, right? If that goes up, the other guy goes up, rather than trying to hammer up these at the top of your very range, and now you try for get a half tone higher, you know, because all you're going to do is press harder and break some rules and have a temporary success. You know, we don't want that. We want a ongoing success. Okay. In order to play romantically, you can't press too hard, right? An old tune, Stardust, Hoagie Carmichael. That's what I used to like when I was about 13 years old. Right? Playing romantically with a sort of a jazz feeling. You can leave the jazz feeling out if you want, and but make sure it's romantic. And now say, well, I'm not going to play it in that key anymore. I'm going to move it up a minor third, and the moment it sounds like I'm playing high, I stop. You know, just rest for a moment, then go back at it again. You don't want it to sound like you're struggling because you're playing a love song. Right? Or something romantic, you know. Okay, so instead of and the minute you can do that, the same thing is happening on the upper part of your register, because you are now hearing a different center to your own range. Your own range is very personal. There, you know, instruction books throughout history have used to tell you what the highest note is. You read the newest ones, they don't get, because they don't know. You know, and at one point it gets silly, you know, and nobody wants to hear a quadruple C, right? I mean, what would you use it for, you know? Okay.
Get a date.
Call your dog, man. Okay, so by doing that, eventually you are owning those notes, and not only that, that becomes your middle register. Get it? All right, and but as soon as you hear this. All the romance just left, and the panic took in, and the hand jammed it home to make sure I get it, because a lot of people watching me. I can't miss, man. Not me, you know. Okay, you're going to miss, man. You're going to miss a lot. I happen to be a pretty good jazz player, so therefore when I miss, I turn it around and you think, hey, wasn't that nice how we meant that? That's the art of a jazz player. Okay. All right, so this might be a good time. Anybody got a question? How was the first question? Anybody want to ask me a question about anything pertaining to the playing of the trumpet, or when we're on the road? Do we like Wendy's better than Burger King, or anything? Yeah. You want to ask a trumpet question here? How many trumpet players we got here? Okay. Okay. Some of you look young enough, you got to have a question about something. Would you like to start? Yes, sir.
Pressure. Talk about pressure.
I'm sorry.
Pressure.
Pressure? Okay. Well, when we talk about pressure, I believe in working hard. How you doing? And I enjoy the physical approach to the instrument. I am not a fan of non-pressure, because I've never heard anybody get what we call, in most of the work that I do, a sizzle while playing non-pressure, but I am totally amazed and will applaud anybody that when I see them playing non-pressure and doing the things that they do that way. I think it's fun to maybe back off now and then. I have to do that a little bit on purpose. You see, there's a thing called playing consciously, right? I don't like that. That means I'm really thinking about what I'm doing. It's like going back to where I said, pick a system that has the fewest rules, because you want to play unconsciously, right? Unconsciously doesn't mean you're going to sleep. It means you're free from all these robotic or non-robotic rules. You know, when Isaac Stern is really playing gloriously on his violin, I'm sure he's not thinking about exactly how he's holding the bow. And he's thinking about how beautiful he's playing that music, and in real truth, he's not thinking at all. He's just playing, you know. So that applies to pressure too, and because certainly we all get that physical message when we use too much pressure, you know, and you run out of gas, or you get a swollen lip or something. If you're breathing correctly, and you're putting air through this instrument correctly with the right amount of pressure, I know for me, if I'm going to miss tonight, unless I have the flu, unless you know, whatever, but being in good shape and healthy and had a nice dinner, and as you get older, you discover that you can't eat a great big steak at 7:30 and hit at 8, you know, and because I used to be able to do that, you know, Now at 5 o'clock, I'm looking for a good restaurant that opens at 5, you know, and and I eat a little lighter, you know, and that sort of stuff. So because and the warm-up helps a lot too, and because of course you're playing consciously when you're warming up because you're checking yourself out. And one thing I do, and that's a good one, is of course the lip drills. And that's a monster problem for a lot of young players that it shouldn't be, by the way. And it's just going from one note to the other and back without changing your valves or your slide position for trombone players, right? The lip drill. But somehow a lot of us have made that into a real monster. You know, like suddenly I look at people that are learning to do it and they're doing it wrong, and they look like they've entered the percussion section, you know, and the horn is moving, and I think of those poor lips, you know, the next morning, you know, and we all can get in trouble, and I know that when I'm not feeling well, which is rare, but we all have those moments, and the show must go on. We find out. We think we're really hip jazz musicians, but there's still a lot of vaudeville in us, you know, that says we got a sore lip, or I got a sore stomach, or I'm going to go out and do the gig anyway, you know. And right, Carl? Anyway, I think I've answered your question that you have to be your own teacher on the amount of pressure that works for you. You know, and just like the double pivot system that I used to have a lead trumpet player when I lived in England and traveled Europe mostly in those days, and with a band, and my lead trumpet was great, and he played exactly the opposite. You know, the higher, I mean, when he'd go for the upper register, Jeff Donnelly, and I used to just go and look at him, and I'd just be amazed because, you know, so when I mention about 15 things that I advise you to do, just remember that if 3 of them work for you and help you, you're a big winner, because the next guy that comes up here and talks to you might be Bud Herseth from the Chicago Symphony, and he's a very strong player, incidentally. And but Bud will say a couple of things different from me, and that's good. And you have a couple of things different from the both of us. But I always remember, just like in baseball, or any of the major sports, that without the basics, the other things won't come, no matter how tricky you get. You know. Okay. All right. Another question? Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, over the years, as far as your equipment changing, and some of the reasons why you might have changed equipment, and what you look for in your equipment when you do change.
Okay. What I look for in my equipment, I'm so glad you asked, because this is the MF horn that I designed myself along with Larry, in collaboration with Larry Ramirez at the Houghton Company. And I make a lot of royalties, so no good Christian home should be without one of these. And I felt like I was on TV just then. I should have done this, right? Okay. No, but this is not an endorsement horn. An endorsement horn is when somebody makes a horn, you know, and then they say, I'll give you a royalty if you'll endorse this horn, and they say so-and-so exclusively plays, and they hand them the horn. You know, in this case, like, there was at least 300 horns went backwards and forwards from Kenosha, Wisconsin to my home, and boy, I would have 4 leader pipes all strapped together here. And, you know, in other words, I was very involved in the putting together of the horn, and this horn, Vito Pascucci, forgive me, does not work for everybody, because no horn does. All right, and just like even more so mouthpieces, Dave Monette put a variation on the mouthpiece that I designed many years ago in Canada, and he improved it. So I was most delighted with his work. He's a wonderful mouthpiece maker, and I consider Holton the best in this country. And so that's where we are with, and where I am. But this is a 468 bore. Now, once again, do not get caught up in sizes. You know, don't get your macho game going, you know. Somebody once called Larry Ramirez at Holton, and he's a predominant fine lead trumpet player with one of the rock horn lines, you know. And they said, I want you to make me a very special horn. And he said, no, so other things. So Larry said then, well, what size horn? What size bore should we get into? And this is a 468. And he said, well, I don't know what size Maynard's is, but make it one size bigger. That's silly, you know, because some of the great players, including some that use the upper register like I do, you know, and they play on a medium bore, you know. And the same thing, my mouthpiece is very old-fashioned. It's got a V cup in it, like the ancient French horn players in Europe. But also, Jack Teagarden, for those of you that know jazz history a little bit, trombone player, V cup, Vic Spiderbeck, Punny Bergen, and how many others, I'm not sure. But my mouthpiece looks like a funnel. It goes like this. And it's, if you're used to a 1C Bach, then this is a small mouthpiece. But it's not a screamer mouthpiece as people think of it. And not only that, it has an enormous bore size. For those of you into numbers, it's size 15, you know, whereas most people use about a 25. Is that right, Carl? Yeah. And that's because I have a heavy airstream. Sorry about that. And then there's guys that play this too. One of the guys at the Boston Symphony plays a bigger bore size in his mouthpiece than I do. Yeah. And I was using a 19 for a long time, and then I went to this because one thing about the MF horn, if you're looking for a horn that's like a Bach and will give you a lot of resistance, it's the wrong horn. If you want the air to just go through. And that's the way I like it. And I like the horn to resonate in mind. I want to feel the resonate, whereas like Dave Manette, who makes all those wonderful instruments for like the Raji, I think he makes for Wynton Marsalis and a lot of the great players. He purposely does not want the instrument to resonate in your hand, so therefore it's a very, very heavy instrument. And he's one of my favorite friends and one of the great horn makers, but his style of horn. So, you know, it goes back to that old adage, when you first start playing an instrument, you let your band director pick your mouthpiece and your horn, you know, or your individual teacher if that's what you have. But within a year or so of playing, you're going to have to make those decisions yourself, you know. Did I answer your question, or did I just ramble on? Oh. Anybody else got a question? Yes. Oh, yeah. Don't pay any attention to that. I make lots of jokes because I have 4 daughters, you know, and 1 granddaughter. And incidentally, the granddaughter's chops look just like mine, with the exception of the callus, you know. Anyway, it's we'll see what her range is in a few years. She's 3 months old. More and more girls are in the bands because, you know, we go all over, not just this country. One of the most marvelous things that I enjoy is the National Association of Jazz Educators, and I was very honored. They put me into their Hall of Fame and all that kind of thing. But what I loved about it is when we performed for their convention in New Orleans about 6 years ago, I couldn't find them in Marriott. And that's when they had to change their logo to the International Association of Jazz Educators. And whereas our thing was usually a little bit of Japan every year, and that was it. And then a little bit of Europe, and then this country, you know. And now we play all over the world. This summer tour will include Australia, New Zealand, Indonesia, Hong Kong, Singapore, no jokes, and then we go on to India, and that was a thrill for me because I actually am a band director. Would you believe this? I'm a band director in the south of India at the school system of Sri Satya Sai Baba, and I'm called a professor of Western music. And they were well taught, the Indian people, by the British, so there has to be a proper name. So I'm not Maynard Ferguson, I'm a professor of Western music, you know, which is not country Western, it means our type of music, you know, unless you like that. Okay, did I answer that one or ramble? Anybody else got a question? Yeah. No. The question was, is Chris Holliday going to be, you know, he hasn't been on the band for 2 years, and, oh no, maybe 3 years, and he's having a wonderful career of his own, and he has his own quartet, and that's one of the things I enjoy the most about the young people that come onto my band, gain a reputation. And he came out of that McDonald's All-Star High School Jazz Band, you know, that Bob Cornell. And unfortunately, McDonald's decided to sponsor sports and things instead of, so we don't eat at McDonald's anymore. Okay. And, no, Chris is a very wonderful example of an exceptional young man who's a great jazz alto saxophonist, and he's on one of my albums. You probably heard him playing Cherokee. Yeah, great player. Yeah, I have two wonderful players right now, and in Matt Wallace from the University, you know Matt, okay, and Chip McNeil. Okay, he's a killer. He's composer, arranger, University of Miami with his master's degree, you know. Whatever happened to the jazz street learner, you know. And every now and then we get one on our band. I tell you, Matt Wallace is great because, you know, he's such a great musician and he plays all the electronics. He's a great performer on the E-Week. And he's from the University of Nebraska, and he didn't study one note of music at the University of Nebraska. He was social science. I think they thought he was going to be the next governor of Nebraska until he heard a record by Charlie Parker. Okay. Yes?
I heard you got an album in Paris. When's it coming out?
An album of...
An album in Paris? You got an album in Paris? When's it coming out?
No, not in Paris. I'm from London, England, at Ronnie Scott's club, and it's called Live in London, and it's on Avenue Jazz Records. I suppose you work for him, and we're noticing I hadn't mentioned my new album. No. Okay, now it's the Live from London album with the tribute to Dizzy Gillespie, and it's got a lot of great things on it, and we did it about a year and a half ago, and sometimes those things take a long time to come out. We're already preparing to go back into the studio in May with some of the things that you'll be hearing tonight that are unrecorded as yet, you know, and so as our itinerary starts heading that way, that's what we'll be doing. Okay, and but funny you should say Paris, because we will be playing Paris, I think it's in September. And so, we have 3 hours for South Africa, but we're a little nervous about that one right now. Okay, I have time for one more question, and then it's time for them to feed me. Yes, sir. Well, I tell you what, the breathing exercises that that you can do, I mentioned that one rather quickly, but it's really being conscious of how you breathe, and also how you're in your stance. It's very hard to answer quickly. I'm very Eastern in my thinking, see, so I talk about the chakras and the energy centers of the strongest parts of your body. Here, right? And going up your spine, so to speak. You know, and if you're standing properly, your vocal coach would say you're using your diaphragm properly, you know. It's really one and the same thing being taught using different words. And then when you talk about different continents, you get into a thing like that. But breathing, so you are consciously using your airstream from the proper place. And if you were to take, and when I mentioned, did I mention weightlifters as well as the, because weightlifters you want to check out too, because when they breathe, if they breathe wrong, they blow it, you know. And in other words, when they're doing something, just like the Pavarotti when he's doing his big number, right? Well, the weightlifter, like they go, right, all right, and that's when he's at his most powerful, is when he has controlled his airstream properly, you know. And so you sort of have to make a study of that. And some people get most of it naturally. I don't think anybody just gets it naturally without being able to improve on it, you know. But for me, I got most of mine out of reading a few Eastern books that have to do with prana and pranayama. Okay, I tell you what, I think we've used up our time here, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of the bands. I think a couple of bands are going to play before us tonight. And so all you guys make sure you do a proper warm-up, and I've really enjoyed being with you for this last hour. I thank you all very much. Remember one thing about music, enjoy it and love it, right? And I'll tell you one quick story about Leonard Bernstein. Somebody once walked up to him, and he was a very young man, and he said, "Mr. Bernstein, should I, now that you've heard me play," he was a cello player, and now that you've heard me play, should I become a professional musician? And Lenny said, absolutely not, which was, of course, shocking to everybody, you know. And they said, why? He said, because if you have to ask, it's almost, he said, like getting married. You're going to do it in spite of yourself or in spite of whatever, because you have to do it. So if you become a professional musician, that's wonderful. And if you don't make it your profession, it's one of the greatest gifts you'll ever have. So enjoy it, and remember, it's a toy, and boy, it's a lot of fun. Okay, have a nice day.